Hi, this is the Tropical Tidbit for Tuesday morning, November 8th. As always, the thoughts here are mine alone, and in making decisions, please consult the National Hurricane Center and your local weather office for the best information. Another video on my phone here. Apologies for the shaking. I'm still traveling for work this week. It'll probably be this way for the rest of the Nicole videos. We are talking about subtropical storm Nicole. In this video, this is a storm that is beginning to become a more symmetric circulation compared to yesterday. We're starting to see some thunderstorm activity on the northern side of that surface low, and it's less elongated than it was yesterday. Still some subtropical characteristics, these large bands of clouds and convection well removed from the main storm center, but you can see that the new area of thunderstorms is becoming more isolated from the broader aspects of this weather system. And so this is becoming more tropical-like in structure, and that will likely continue as this continues to move in a low shear environment toward the west over warm water. Let me show you a close-up shot of the satellite loop here this morning as the sun has risen, and we'll see, sorry, just let the loop load there. You'll see a pretty tight area of circulation now, again, less elongated than yesterday. Most of the convection here on the northwest side. One thing that the recon data has found, if we look at the plane that's flying through there right now, is that the strongest winds are on the northern side, which we kind of expect, but the radius of the strongest winds is still fairly far from the center. It's about a little less than a degree of latitude on the north side, but on the east side, the strongest wind is more like 1.5 degrees from the center. Same on the west side as well, where you see the dark blue there. That indicates that it's still not the most compact core that we would typically see in a fully tropical cyclone. So it's still in the process of contracting. And for the moment, that means that rapid intensification or anything like that, not imminent with a structure like this, but some gradual intensification is likely here as we've seen the pressure continue to fall. 995 millibars is lower than yesterday by about 5 millibars or so. And we are seeing winds of about 45 miles per hour, but we'll see what this new plane finds here in some of the strongest convection on the northwest side. Those winds will likely come up a bit as the system starts moving toward Florida. And the more compact it gets, the higher the winds near the very center of the cyclone could get. But one of the big stories about Nicole will be that the overall system will be quite large and expansive, especially on the northern side. This is a look at the GFS showing the moisture plot. A lot of the dry air is still on the south side here. We kind of saw in satellite imagery most of the convection's on the northwest side. That's where the moisture is, but you can see that the circulation is more circular. These black contours now forming lots of concentric circles on this plot. And as we go forward, we'll see the moisture start to wrap around more. And by the time we get to overnight Tuesday, more symmetric looking green here. So moisture all the way around the circulation. The pressure is down to 990 millibars. And then we see it continuing to strengthen as it nears the Florida coastline, near hurricane intensity by the time it reaches the coast sometime overnight on Wednesday. Now, if we look at the upper level flow, we'll see that the reason this symmetrization of the moisture field is occurring is because there's fairly light winds aloft. This is at 250 millibars, and you can see in general light quiescent flow, maybe lightly out of the east, over the northern Bahamas and off of the southeastern United States. And the red L is where Nicole is, and this is pretty light shear. So given enough time, even though there's dry air on the south side of the system, it will become more symmetric, and we'll see thunderstorms perhaps over more than just the northwestern quadrant of the storm. And that's why we're expecting some intensification as it approaches the coast. Now, looking aloft at the mid-level steering flow, this area of blue, the upper level low that Nicole is kind of paired with right now, that's to the southeast of a big ridge over the southeastern United States, rotating clockwise like this. And so right now there's northeasterly flow trying to shunt it a little bit southward toward Florida. We could see a little bit of a dip here toward Great Abaco and Grand Bahama before turning eventually maybe back toward the northwest as it nears the Florida coastline. And the reason we'll see it turn is that this ridge over the southeastern U.S. is going to shift eastward over time. And so by the time Nicole reaches the coast, this ridge is now moving across Virginia and Maryland and moving out into the Atlantic. So the steering flow goes from being toward the southwest to being toward the northwest as the storm is nearing the coast. So we see a turn more toward the northwest, moving into the Big Bend area of Florida, and then eventually northward and northeastward up the eastern seaboard, essentially, as we have a big trough over the Great Plains coming in blue here, and this ridge is now way out over the water, so the steering flow switches and is now out of the southwest. And so in general, this kind of turn toward the northeast will bring this up the eastern seaboard. And that's an important point to mention here is right now we're talking mostly about Florida in terms of the immediate impacts in the northern Bahamas. But later on down the line, this will bring significant weather impacts all the way up the eastern seaboard. So a widespread weather event here. Now looking at the surface wind field, again, Nicole is becoming tropical in nature gradually here, and what that implies is exactly what the GFS model shows, and every model, really shows. This is just the GFS for an example here. A tighter core of wind right there. You can see that little donut. That's the tropical-like structure. But remember, there's a big area of high pressure. That ridge, there's a big surface high underneath that mid-level ridge too, over New England and the eastern U.S., and a bit of cold air damming going on east of the Appalachians. The gradient between that cold air and high pressure and the tropical storm means that there's this huge field of strong northeasterly winds to the north of Nicole. And so we're talking about winds 40, 50 miles an hour coming on shore well to the north of where Nicole ultimately makes landfall. So you'll see that this wind field is expansive on this northern side. And so we're going to have coastal flooding and high winds, rough surf, rip currents well to the north of the landfall point, even into the Carolinas, and then potentially even beyond when the remnants start moving toward the north and we get high winds up in the mid-Atlantic and potentially New England as well. So this will be, again, a wide-ranging weather event, and hazards will extend well away from the center. So as we're looking at the forecast from the National Hurricane Center, a couple of things to keep in mind here is, the current wind field in yellow is pretty large and will continue to remain large, as we just talked about. But in terms of the actual maximum wind impacts, those are going to be probably near the center of the storm as this comes toward Great Abaco, Grand Bahama, hurricane warnings in effect. That tiny fist of wind maximized near the center of Nicole is where hurricane conditions would be most likely. And then you can see the Hurricane Center calling for 75-mile-per-hour winds, making Nicole a hurricane at the point of landfall in Florida. Somewhere between West Palm Beach and Cape Canaveral is kind of where most of the models are targeting the landfall. That little bit of a turn from moving southwest to moving more toward the northwest as it's moving into Florida. And you can see the tropical storm warnings in blue extending all the way up to Georgia here. And there are many other hazards associated with this, including storm surge and potential for inland flooding. This is the flash flooding potential map here. Not expecting a ton of rain with Nicole. It's not going to stall out, and we're not expecting tremendous amounts of rain, but there will be enough to cause the potential for flash flooding over a wide region here in the southeastern U.S. You can see the area in yellow, slight risk for flash flooding across a broad area of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. And then storm surge, obviously a concern with all of this onshore flow. Lots of wind out of the northeast kind of pushing ocean water toward the Florida coastline. So we have storm surge warnings and watches from South Florida all the way up into Georgia. And you'll see in yellow here 2 to 4, 3 to 5 feet all the way up and down the coast. Flood-prone areas, including the St. Johns River up near Jacksonville and St. Augustine. And the usual areas in Florida that are prone to coastal flooding will be prone here, as there's a large area of onshore flow. And worth noting that although the Hurricane Center's storm surge products terminate in Georgia, that doesn't mean that the coastal flooding impacts terminate in Georgia. These products are tailored specifically for the impacts that are directly related to Nicole. And once you get far enough away from Nicole, this actually switches to non-tropical products. So if you go up to the National Weather Service website, you'll see coastal flood advisories and warnings extending well into South Carolina, places like Charleston. And if I keep going northeast, North Carolina, Morehead City, all these areas here up into the Cape. And this is going to be a wide-ranging coastal flooding threat, regardless of how far this really is from Nicole. Obviously, this is very far from the center of the storm, and the National Hurricane Center products don't extend this far north, but nonetheless, there will be a wide-ranging coastal impact due to the wide area of onshore wind that will be strong and pushing water toward the coastline. So another look at the forecast here. It has shifted just a nudge, just a few hours later. Landfall is at about overnight Wednesday night, 1 a.m. Thursday Eastern time here on this forecast, but the timing has has not changed more than just a few hours here, and the landfall location seems pretty set in the central area of Florida. Again, the exact landfall location won't change the fact that there's a broad range of impacts here, but in terms of hurricane force wind, that little area confined near the center is where that's most likely. So again, hurricane watches are up, including for Lake Okeechobee. So everyone, please stay safe. There's going to be another area to the west, perhaps, if this re-emerges over water over the northeastern Gulf, where a tropical storm watch is in effect. And keep in mind that if Nicole pokes back out over the northeastern Gulf, there could be a little bit of onshore flow that causes the potential for some storm surge in the northeastern Gulf as well. We're not currently sitting with a storm surge watch for that area of the coastline, but if the track shifts west at all and brings Nicole back out over water for a brief time, then we could see the potential for flooding there as well, along with the potential for power outages if there's elevated wind gusts over places of like northern Florida and southern Georgia where there's a lot of trees. Could see some power outages in those areas as well. That's about it for this video, everyone. Please stay safe, and I'll probably have another one tomorrow morning.